June 6th, 2015. Clinton Correctional Facility, New York. Two men vanished from America's little Siberia. And the craziest part? They used tools hidden in frozen hamburger meat to cut through steel and concrete. Richard Matt and David Sweat were serving life sentences for murder at Clinton Correctional, a 150-year-old maximum security fortress. On the night of June 5th, they crawled through holes in their cell walls and emerged from a manhole outside the prison. But this isn't just a story about an escape. It's about the 4 months they spent sawing through steel every night at 2 a.m. The prison employee who fell for a convicted killer's charm and smuggled in the tools. And the note they left behind that mocked the guards. Have a nice day. 3 weeks after escaping, one of them was shot dead in the woods. The other was captured a mile and a half from the Canadian border, while running across an open field in broad daylight. This is how two convicted murderers pulled off the most audacious prison break in New York State history, and how it all fell apart in the Adirondack wilderness. Clinton Correctional Facility sat in Dannemora, New York, a town so remote and cold that locals called it Little Siberia. The prison itself was a fortress, built in 1845. Thick stone walls, armed watchtowers, electric fences, razor wire everywhere. It was a maximum security facility, Category A, the highest level. When you went to Clinton, you weren't getting out, not legally. The prison housed over 2,000 inmates, murderers, rapists, gang leaders, the worst criminals in New York State. Guards maintained strict control, head counts every few hours, cell searches, limited movement, cameras everywhere. In the prison's 170-year history, no one had ever escaped from the maximum security wing. The record was perfect. Everyone believed Clinton was escape-proof. Everyone except Richard Matt and David Sweat. Richard Matt was 48 years old in 2015, serving 25 years to life for murder. But murder wasn't his only crime. Matt was a career criminal. Burglary, assault, kidnapping. He'd been in and out of prisons his entire adult life. His most serious crime happened in 1997. He kidnapped and murdered his former boss, William Rickerson, tortured him, beat him to death, dismembered the body, fled to Mexico. Mexican authorities caught him in 2007, extradited him back. He was sentenced to 25 to life at Clinton Correctional. But Matt wasn't just violent. He was intelligent, charismatic, manipulative. He knew how to read people, how to exploit their weaknesses. He was also an artist, a talented painter. He created lifelike portraits. His artwork was impressive. Guards requested paintings from him. He gave them away as gifts, building relationships, earning trust. Matt used his art as currency. A painting meant a favor later, an extra snack, a blind eye to rule violations. Small things that added up. How do you turn a hobby into a weapon? Matt had figured it out years ago. By 2014, Matt had earned enough trust to work maintenance jobs around the prison. He assisted electricians, helped plumbers, fixed wiring, unclogged drains, all under supervision, of course. But while he worked, he observed. He studied the layout behind the walls, the tunnels, the pipes, the ventilation shafts, the access points. Every detail mattered. He was mapping the prison's skeleton, looking for weaknesses. David Sweat was younger, 34 years old, quieter than Matt, more reserved, but equally dangerous. Sweat was serving life without parole for killing a sheriff's deputy in 2002. Deputy Kevin Tarsia responded to a burglary call. Sweat shot him multiple times, ran him over with a car, left him to die. He was caught, convicted, sentenced to life, with no possibility of release. But Sweat refused to accept that fate. How do you spend 60 years in a concrete box, knowing you'll never see freedom again? You don't, you plan. Unlike Matt, he wasn't charismatic, but he was smart, physically fit, athletic. He could climb, squeeze through tight spaces, work in uncomfortable positions for hours. And he was patient, extraordinarily patient. He could work on something for months without mistakes. That patience would be critical. Matt and Sweat met in Clinton's Honor Block, a housing unit for inmates with good behavior. They bonded over art. Matt taught Sweat how to draw, how to shade, how to create perspective. But more importantly, they bonded over their shared desire for freedom. Neither man accepted their sentences. Both were willing to risk everything for a chance to escape. By early 2015, they'd become close friends, partners, conspirators, and they'd developed a plan. Matt and Sweat had noticed something during their maintenance work. Behind the cell walls were utility corridors, narrow passages between cell blocks containing pipes, steam lines, electrical conduits, ventilation shafts. The prison was built in 1845, renovated many times, but the basic infrastructure remained. A maze of tunnels hidden behind the walls, mostly forgotten, rarely inspected. If they could cut through their cell walls, they could access those corridors, navigate through the tunnels, find a way out. It sounded impossible, but they'd studied it carefully. They believed it could work. But how do you cut through solid steel walls without the guards hearing a thing? They just needed tools, and inside help. That help came from Joyce Mitchell, a 51-year-old woman who supervised the prison's tailor shop, where inmates sewed clothing and repaired uniforms. Joyce had worked at Clinton for years. She was married, had a son, lived a quiet life in Dannemora, but she was lonely. David Sweat noticed first. He worked in the tailor shop, talked to Joyce, flirted, made her feel special. She responded. Then, Sweat was moved. Richard Matt saw his opportunity. Matt was a master manipulator. Joyce was the perfect target, middle-aged, lonely, vulnerable. He created a fantasy, told her about his life, his art, his dreams. He painted her pictures, made her feel seen, valued, important. He told her she was special, that they could have a future together, outside the prison, a new life. Joyce fell for it completely. She wasn't helping an inmate escape, she was helping her future husband. How does a married mother throw away her entire life for a convicted killer she barely knows? Step by step, lie by lie, until there's no way back. Matt played her perfectly. By February 2015, Matt and Sweat were ready to begin the escape, but they needed tools, real tools, hacksaw blades to cut through steel, chisels to break through brick, drill bits for concrete. They couldn't get those items through normal channels. Guards searched everything. Tools were strictly controlled. Inventory was checked daily. So they asked Joyce for help. She agreed immediately, but how do you smuggle hacksaw blades into a maximum security prison? Joyce came up with a clever solution. She would hide the tools inside packages of frozen ground beef, raw hamburger meat, the kind used in the prison kitchen. In February 2015, Joyce purchased 6 hacksaw blades from a local hardware store. She wrapped them in plastic, pushed them deep inside a package of frozen ground beef, sealed it back up. The meat looked normal, untampered with. She brought the package to work, asked a friendly guard, Officer Gene Palmer, to deliver it to Matt and Sweat's cell area. Palmer didn't suspect anything. Joyce was a trusted employee. The meat was for cooking, no reason to question it. He delivered the package, never knowing he was handing over the keys to an escape. Who checks a package of frozen ground beef for hacksaw blades? Nobody. That was the genius of it. Later that night, in the privacy of their cells, Matt and Sweat opened the meat, found the blades hidden inside. They finally had what they needed. The real work could begin. How do you cut through steel walls without anyone hearing? That was the challenge Matt and Sweat faced. Their cells were in a block with dozens of other inmates. Guards walked past every hour. Other prisoners were listening. Any unusual noise could raise suspicion. They developed a system. They waited until after midnight, when most inmates were asleep, when guards were tired and less alert, when ambient noise from pipes and ventilation would mask their work. Sweat went first. He worked at the back of his cell, behind his bunk, out of sight from the cell door. He had a small hacksaw blade, just 3 inches long, thin metal, easy to hide. He waited for background noise, the clang of a pipe, the hum of ventilation, the distant slam of a door. Only then would he make a cut, slowly, carefully. The blade scraped against steel, making a horrible screeching sound. He'd cut for 10 seconds, stop, listen, wait, cut again. Every sound felt deafening. Every footstep in the corridor made his heart stop. One guard deciding to check his cell, and everything was over. What if a guard walked past at the wrong moment, What if another inmate reported the strange sounds? But night after night, no one noticed. Matt worked the same way in his cell, patiently, methodically, making progress inch by inch. After about a month, they'd each carved a man-sized hole in the back of their cells, big enough to squeeze through, leading to the utility corridor behind the wall. But they couldn't leave the holes exposed. Guards would see them during inspections, so they created covers, thin pieces of painted cardboard, decorated to look like the cell wall. During the day, they'd prop these covers over the holes. At night, they'd remove them and slip through. The deception worked perfectly. They also created decoy dummies for their beds, rolled up sweatshirts for heads, clothes stuffed under blankets. From the cell door, it looked like someone sleeping. Guards on night rounds would glance in, see a figure in bed, move on. Incredibly, on some nights, both Matt and Sweat were gone, crawling through the prison's guts, while guards walked past their cells and assumed they were asleep. Behind the cell walls, they found a complex maze, narrow catwalks, steam pipes, electrical conduits, water lines, ventilation ducts. Everything was dark, dusty, hot, cramped. But they could move through it. They mapped out a route, following the steam pipes. These massive pipes ran from the prison's heating plant through the cell blocks and out to other buildings. If they could follow the pipes far enough, they might reach an exit point outside the main walls. But there were obstacles. First, a brick wall blocked their path. They needed to break through it without making too much noise. They used their hacksaw blades to scrape out mortar between the bricks, night after night, brick by brick. Eventually, they created an opening big enough to pass through. Second, a massive steam pipe blocked the corridor, too big to go around, too hot to touch when the steam was running. They'd have to cut through the pipe itself. That required more tools. Joyce Mitchell smuggled in additional items over the following weeks. Chisels, drill bits, a hole punch, all hidden in packages of frozen meat, the same method as before. Officer Palmer continued to deliver them, still unaware of what he was actually transporting. With better tools, Matt and Sweat made faster progress. They cut a hole through the steam pipe, big enough to crawl through. They had to work only at night when the steam was turned off. Otherwise, they'd be boiled alive. The work was exhausting. The space was cramped. The heat was intense, even with the steam off. Sweat's athleticism was crucial. He could contort himself through narrow passages, climb up and down using makeshift ropes, work in uncomfortable positions for hours. Matt struggled more. He was older, heavier, less fit. At one point, Sweat worried that Matt wouldn't be able to squeeze through the tight sections. He put Matt on a diet, made him exercise, forced him to lose weight. A convicted murderer putting his partner on a workout plan inside a maximum security prison. Has there ever been a stranger fitness program? It worked. Matt slimmed down enough to fit. By early June 2015, after 4 months of secret work, they'd completed their escape route. They'd followed the steam pipe to its terminus, a point underneath a manhole cover on a residential street outside the prison walls. The manhole was secured with a chain, but during a test run, they'd cut through the chain. The manhole was ready. Freedom was just a push away. They set the date, June 5th, 2015, Friday night. But they needed one more thing from Joyce, a getaway car. The plan was simple. Joyce would meet them near the prison with her car. She'd drive them far away, maybe to Mexico, somewhere they could disappear. Joyce agreed. She was fully committed now. She'd smuggled in the tools. She'd helped plan the escape. She was going to abandon her husband, her son, her job, her entire life, to run away with 2 convicted murderers. It was insane, but she believed in the fantasy Matt had created. June 5th, 2015, the night of the escape. Everything was ready. Matt and Sweat had packed bags with supplies, water, snacks, extra clothes, tools, a map, everything they'd need on the run. The 11 p.m. head count passed. Guards walked by cells 23 and 24, saw figures sleeping in the beds, counted them, moved on. Those figures were dummies. Matt and Sweat were already gone. They slipped through the holes in their cell walls, into the utility corridor, down the metal catwalk they'd used dozens of times before, through the opening in the brick wall, into the steam pipe. They crawled through the pipe, dragging their bags behind them. It was dark, hot, claustrophobic. But they'd practiced this route many times. They knew every turn, every obstacle. After what felt like hours, they reached the end. The manhole cover. They pushed up. It moved easily. The chain was already cut. Shortly after midnight on June 6th, Richard Matt and David Sweat emerged from a manhole on Barker Street in Dannemora, outside the prison walls, free men for the first time in years. They stood there for a moment, breathing fresh air, looking at the stars, feeling the cool night breeze on their faces. And then they were out. A quiet residential street, sleeping houses, streetlights glowing softly. For the first time in decades, no walls, no bars, no guards counting heads. Just the sound of the wind, just the glow of the moon, just freedom. But then reality hit. Where was Joyce? She was supposed to be waiting for them, parked nearby with her car, ready to drive them away. She wasn't there. Joyce Mitchell had panicked. The reality of what she was doing finally hit her. She was about to throw away her entire life, her marriage, her family, her career, for 2 convicted murderers. She couldn't do it. Instead of meeting them as planned, she checked herself into a hospital, claimed she was having a panic attack, left Matt and Sweat stranded. But they didn't know that yet. They waited, looking around, growing more nervous by the minute. Where was she? After 10 minutes, they realized she wasn't coming. They had to move, fast, before someone discovered they were gone. They started walking, heading out of town, toward the woods, hoping to put distance between themselves and the prison before dawn. They had one close call immediately. A local resident arriving home late spotted them on the street, yelled at them, asked what they were doing. Sweat quickly apologized, said they were lost, looking for a friend's house. The homeowner, not recognizing them, accepted the explanation, let them go. Matt and Sweat disappeared into the darkness, heading toward the Adirondack wilderness. Could 2 men on foot actually outrun a statewide manhunt? Behind them, inside Clinton Correctional, guards were still oblivious. The night shift continued normally. Routine patrols, hourly checks, everything seemed fine. But at 5:30 a.m. on June 6th, the morning bed check revealed the truth. Guards approached cells 23 and 24, looked inside, called for the inmates to wake up. No response. They opened the cells, walked in, pulled back the blankets. Dummies, just clothes and rolled up sweatshirts. The guards stared in shock, then ran to alert their supervisor. Within minutes, alarms blared throughout the prison. Sirens wailed. Every available officer mobilized. The facility went into lockdown. No one in or out. Guards searched the cells, found the holes in the back walls, followed the route through the utility corridor, through the brick wall, through the steam pipe, all the way to the manhole. And there, next to the pipe, they found a note. A hand-drawn cartoon, a smiley face wearing a hard hat, and the words, "Have a nice day." It was a taunt, a middle finger to the guards. Matt and Sweat were mocking them. Governor Andrew Cuomo arrived at the prison later that morning. He walked through the escape route himself, crawled through the tunnels, examined the holes, the cut pipe, the manhole. He told reporters it was elaborate and sophisticated, almost like something out of a movie. Within hours, the largest manhunt in New York State history was underway. Over 1,000 law enforcement officers descended on the region. State police, local sheriffs, FBI, U.S. Marshals, Border Patrol, everyone mobilized. Roadblocks went up on every highway, every back road. Officers checked every vehicle leaving the area. Helicopters flew overhead. Infrared cameras scanned the forests at night. K-9 units tracked scents. Officers went door to door in Dannemora, asking residents if they'd seen anything suspicious, warning them to lock their doors, to stay inside. 2 dangerous killers were on the loose. Schools closed, businesses shut down. The entire region was paralyzed by fear. Matt and Sweat had a 12-hour head start. Would it be enough to reach Canada? They moved quickly through the Adirondack wilderness, thick forests, dense undergrowth, swamps, mountains, some of the most rugged terrain in New York State. They traveled mostly at night, hid during the day, in gullies. abandoned hunting cabins, anywhere out of sight. Their goal was Canada. The border was about 30 miles north. If they could reach Quebec, they might disappear. Canadian authorities wouldn't necessarily know about them immediately. They could blend in, get fake IDs, start over. But 30 miles on foot through wilderness is harder than it sounds, especially when you're exhausted, hungry, being hunted by thousands of officers. The first week was the easiest. They had supplies, energy, hope. They made good progress, staying off trails, avoiding roads, moving through areas where helicopters couldn't see them. But by the second week, they were struggling. Their food ran out. They were drinking water from streams, sleeping on the ground. Mosquitoes swarmed them constantly. The nights were cold. They had no shelter. And the manhunt was getting closer. Every day brought more officers, more searches, more pressure. Around June 20th, 2 weeks after the escape, Matt and Sweat stumbled upon an empty cabin near a place called Owl's Head, about 20 miles from the prison. The cabin belonged to someone who used it seasonally. Right now, it was vacant. They broke in. Inside, they found food, water, a rifle, ammunition, maps. They ate real food for the first time in weeks, rested, cleaned themselves up. They spent about a day there, planning their next moves, studying the maps, trying to figure out the best route to Canada. But staying there was a mistake. The cabin's owner returned for a visit. He immediately noticed things were wrong. Items moved, food missing, coffee pot in the wrong place. He called the police. What are the odds? Of all the cabins in the Adirondacks, they'd picked one where the owner happened to show up that week. Investigators rushed to the scene, found DNA evidence. Matt and Sweat had been there, recently. The net was closing. Officers flooded the area, hundreds of them, searching every cabin, every shed, every possible hiding spot. Helicopters circled constantly. Matt and Sweat realized they had to move, fast. They grabbed what supplies they could carry, left the cabin, headed deeper into the woods. But the stress was breaking them, Matt especially. He was older, less fit, exhausted. He'd found alcohol in the cabin, drank too much, slowed down even more. He started talking about desperate measures, taking hostages, shootouts with police, suicide by cop, anything to avoid going back to prison. Sweat realized Matt was becoming a liability. If they stayed together, they'd both get caught or killed. So Sweat made a decision, a brutal, calculated decision. One morning, while Matt was still sleeping off his alcohol, Sweat quietly gathered his share of the supplies. The map, the rifle, food, water, and without a word, he left. He abandoned his partner, left him alone in the woods, gave him no warning, no chance to protest. How do you walk away from the man you spent 4 months planning with? Easy, when your life depends on it. It was cold-blooded, but Sweat wanted to survive, and Matt was slowing him down. Matt woke up alone. His partner was gone. The supplies were gone. The weapons were gone. He had nothing. He tried to continue on his own, but he was exhausted, weak, lost. He wandered through the woods for days, making little progress. June 26, 2015, near Malone, New York. Law enforcement officers heard a gunshot in the forest, a signal. Someone was out there. A tactical team of Border Patrol agents and state troopers moved in, carefully, weapons ready, searching through the trees. Matt heard them coming. He had a shotgun he'd stolen from a different cabin. He decided he wasn't going back to prison. He'd fight. He saw the agents moving through the woods, raised his weapon, aimed, ready to fire. Then he coughed. A sudden, involuntary cough, probably from days of exposure, cold, damp, stress. His body betrayed him. Could one tiny cough really end a 3-week manhunt? Yes, that's exactly what it did. That tiny sound gave away his position. Agents zeroed in. "Drop your weapon!" A Border Patrol marksman fired. Single shot. Hit Matt in the head. Killed him instantly. Matt's escape ended in the woods. 21 days of freedom, then death. The manhunt refocused entirely on David Sweat. One fugitive left, thousands of officers still searching. June 28, 2015. 2 days after Matt's death, Sweat was 1.5 miles from the Canadian border, so close to freedom, but he'd grown impatient, reckless. He was walking along a rural road in broad daylight, a critical mistake. Sergeant J. Cook, a New York State police officer, was on patrol. He saw a man walking along the road. Something about him seemed off, wrong. Cook did a double take, recognized the face, David Sweat. He pulled over, got out of his car. "Stop! Police!" Sweat looked at him, realized he'd been recognized, and ran. He sprinted across an open field, heading for a tree line. If he could reach the woods, he might escape. 1.5 miles from Canada, 3 weeks on the run, and now an open field between him and freedom. Could he make it? Cook chased him on foot, but Sweat was fast. Even after 3 weeks on the run, even exhausted and hungry, he was pulling away. Cook stopped, raised his handgun, steadied his aim. He was over 100 feet away. Moving target, open field, difficult shot. He fired twice. Both shots hit. Sweat fell to the ground, wounded, but alive. Officers rushed in, cuffed him, called for medical assistance. The 3-week manhunt was finally over. David Sweat survived his injuries, returned to prison, not Clinton. He was placed in harsh solitary confinement, 23 hours a day alone, no contact with other inmates, for the rest of his life. Joyce Mitchell was arrested, confessed to everything, pleaded guilty. At sentencing, she cried, said it was the worst mistake of her life. She received up to 7 years. Officer Gene Palmer lost his job, faced criminal charges for unwittingly aiding the escape. The investigation revealed massive security failures, guards who didn't check cells properly, supervisors who ignored warnings. Multiple staff were fired, security procedures overhauled, the honor block shut down, tool control tightened, cell inspections increased. All because 2 inmates spent 4 months sawing through steel, and 1 employee fell for a killer's lies. The escape dominated headlines, books were written, TV movies produced. Their escape entered prison lore as one of the most sophisticated breakouts in history. But it failed. Matt died in the woods. Sweat was caught. Both paid the price. Sweat later said he had no regrets, that dying slowly in prison was no life at all. He'd rather die trying than accept his fate. Matt left a note. "You left me no choice but to grow old and die in here. I had to do something." For 21 days, they were free. They breathed open air, saw sky, felt rain, slept under stars. Then it ended, Matt with a bullet, Sweat in chains. They proved something that terrifies authorities, that with planning, patience, and inside help, even a 170-year-old fortress can be breached. The frozen meat, the hacksaw blades, the 4 months of work, the dummies, the tunnels, the steam pipe, every step required perfect execution. But they made it out. They actually made it out. For 3 weeks, they were free. That's the legacy of Richard Matt and David Sweat. Not that they escaped, but that they proved it could be done. That they exposed the cracks in the system and forced changes that will last for decades. Today, at Clinton Correctional, the holes in the walls have been filled. The tunnels are monitored. The steam pipes are secured. Guards check cells more carefully. Tools are tracked obsessively. Nothing is taken for granted. Remember that mocking note? "Have a nice day." The smiley face drawn next to it? That simple piece of paper became the most famous prison escape artifact in modern American history. A reminder to every guard, every warden, every administrator that complacency is the real enemy. All because 2 convicted killers hid hacksaw blades in frozen meat and spent 4 months crawling through the prison's guts and left behind a mocking note that still haunts the guards. Have a nice day. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe and activate the bell button so you can receive new videos.